ninth season of Yeah, We Read It. I'm your host, Meggie.
I'm also your host. My name's Laura.
And we mentioned this in the last episode. We are doing a very special season. This season, we are reading all of John Green's anthology. We are starting off with his first book, Looking for Alaska, arguably his best banger.
Best banger. Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this season just because John Green was a very prolific YA author in lots of different types of stories.
And I'm super excited to dive into this season because we're doing something different. We're bringing on friends for every single episode to read these books that really formed us in our youth. And our first friend is Austin.
Guys, thanks for having me.
Yay, Austin, thank you for being here. Austin is a fan of the podcast. I once got drunk and he and I talked about our Hunger Games season in detail. Very, very broad detail. So, very excited to have you, buddy. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. John Green was very formative just growing up and especially as a young man and, just with kind of what he talks about, and also I've just caught just such an incredible amount of flack from friends and partners and things over the years for just being a big John Green fan, and now it's finally paid off. I'm with you guys.
I don't know why. I mean, I get I feel like I've said this to both of you. Like John Green books, I feel like you either really love the book or you really hate the book. There's no this book was fine. It's very, very that, but I really don't think you can say he's a bad writer or you should shit on someone for liking his books.
And when we brought up this idea, we were all really drunk. We were hanging out at Laura's studio apartment, and Austin was the first one to really jump at Looking for Alaska.
Yeah.
So, what is your history with this book? Why do you like it so much?
So this was one of those first books, in high school. It was given to me just as oh, hey, this is a YA book you should read. It was the first time I had read a book, I think that was actually written by a man, actually. So I was big into Harry Potter with Joanne writing those. And then read Hunger Games. I read Suzanne Collins, of course. But John Green, I thought, captured this voice of my unhinged teenage boy brain. And it was the first time I had felt that, somebody was speaking my language. And now, reading it again as a 28-year-old semi-grown man, God, that was embarrassing. It's just so I'm really looking forward to talking about this from the lens of, okay, I've grown up, but it was a very formative book for me. And I read through this and I kind of see a younger version of myself. So
I really like the way John Green writes is because a lot of his protagonists are extremely flawed. I feel like in the world of YA, it's always this very much heroic person who, against all odds, can overcome anything, and he tends to write very realistic people who are just very insecure, very unsure of themselves, don't know who they are yet, which I think really does set him apart from the other YA authors that we have read.
Yeah, and I like him because Alaska has green eyes and big tits, and that's the kind of person I want to be.
Wow. And with that, and on that note, let's dive into the roller coaster of the book that is Looking for Alaska. So this book is divided into two parts, before and after. There is no chapters. There is a simple measure of time, how either this many days before or this many days after, and those split up are paragraphs. They're not chapters, which I thought was a really interesting choice format-wise.
Yeah, it really captures how fleeting time is.
It really captures time. Some days go by quickly, other days are more important than others.
Yeah, so our protagonist is Miles Halter, and he's not a cool guy because he lives in Florida, mostly, but also he has no friends.
Yeah, it's 136 days before we learn he's going to go to boarding school in Alabama. His dad went there. We learned that Miles' whole thing is that he's seeking this thing called the Great Perhaps to search for bigger meaning in life, but we learned pretty quick that Miles is a loser. He has no friends, so the likelihood of him getting a perhaps is limited.
Yeah, and we're not sure if the no friends came before the living in Florida, but the two could be conflated.
Yeah, it's when his mom throws him the going away party, and it's actually really sad he's like, my mom has convinced herself that I've been hiding this burgeoning popularity from her, and it just blows up in mom's face. Yeah. And the mom character throughout is just oh my gosh, just just believe him. He is a nerd. Like, don't force it, Mom.
I know.
Yeah, his parents so badly like want him to be a young budding socialite, and he just is not.
Yeah, only 2 kids show up to this party of him leaving Florida because he wants to leave, which is very relatable, and he wants to go to Alabama. Why? I guess school, but
yeah, nepotism.
Yeah, he's a legacy at Culver Creek Academy.
I know, yeah. It's one of those things, it's like, what a loser. You're a legacy at some Culver Creek school in Alabama that most people don't even stay on campus for the weekends because that's how boring it is.
Yeah.
But he goes to the school and we are introduced to Chip, who is his roommate, and we quickly learn that they are 2 peas in a pod because Miles, his other big thing is that he likes to memorize people's last words. And Chip's big thing is he just likes to memorize facts in general, and mostly capitals of places. So they're going to be buddies now because now they have something to bond them.
Yeah, it did feel very realistic in the sense of, people love setting high school and universities and academies, which is just college. But the freshman year college experience of just being friends with whoever's in proximity.
Yes.
Not sure if they would be friends outside of the fact that they're just roommates.
Yeah. No, 100%. They have nothing in common.
Yeah, but like them being forced together and so Chip is referred to as the Colonel, which I think is hilarious because it's like, oh, he's this little military man walking around bossing everyone around. I'm like, I think it's cute that somebody, instead of calling him Napoleon, was like, no, we're going the next level. You're the Colonel.
Yeah.
Which and throughout this kind of through line of the book, like, ooh, they follow the Colonel, and they're like, and there are times where even the characters say, like, we don't know why we follow him. He has this, like, aggressive charisma to him, and I think Miles just needs somebody to follow.
Yeah.
And, like, imprint on.
The biggest thing I think listeners will learn, and we all, like, really learned going through this, is Miles is such a non-action person. He doesn't make any choices for himself. Like, everything he does is like someone else telling him to do it. And the Colonel, who he will be here to referred as, because Chip out the door, Colonel full 24/7 now. He decides to give Miles a cool, fun nickname because that's how buddy they are. And he's like, I'm gonna call you Pudge because it'd be funny because you're really skinny.
Oh yeah, we're learning through John Green's anthologies. He's got a big obsession with the early 2000s was pretty fat phobic.
Yeah, and John Green is no different. He's a pretty fat phobic in these books too.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a few that I marked where I'm like, Christ, Green, calm down.
Exactly. It's like, we could have just taken this out and it wouldn't have affected the plot at all.
But Chip and Miles, though fundamentally different, Chip is kind of public school kid, cool. Miles seems to be like upper middle class. Chip explains the lowdown to Miles, or the Colonel explains the lowdown to Miles, which is just there's a hierarchy of rich kids at Culver Creek. They are called the Weekend Warriors. They just come to school on the weekends, and the public school kids are in dorms and they hang out. And Colonel is like, there's not much overmixing, even though he's kind of a hypocrite because his girlfriend is a Weekend Warrior right now, Sarah.
That's such high school logic, though, where it's just like, this is how things are, except for when they aren't. We also are quickly introduced to Alaska, who she has a single now, we learn, because her former roommate has been expelled for reasons we'll divulge later. And Alaska is a very bubbly, manic pixie dream girl archetype, which is really, really important because this book is very much about calling out the idealization of women. But she, being cool and fun as she is, has to tell the Colonel about how she got her boob honked against her will this summer.
Yeah, the Me Too movement hasn't existed yet. It is just a thinly veiled sexual assault story. She gets her boob honked by a friend who does not want to be in the friend zone.
Yeah.
A non-existent place.
And Alaska's other big thing is always talking about how she has a boyfriend. We also get to introduce to it's true.
She's got 2 personalities, big tits and boyfriend.
Yeah.
But also like if you put that up against, right? Like, so her formative moment is unwanted sexual advances, potential sexual assault, and so she's like, the first thing she tells any man she meets, I have a boyfriend. So it's like up front and center, she knows she's being sexualized by all these people. And that was one of the things that when I read it this time around, it's been a long time since I've read it, is I always thought like, oh wow, Alaska is kind of just this, in the wind, she's being blown around, all the, like, she's so sexual. I'm like, no, she's deeply aware. And so she wields that, like, a bit like a sword, right? It's both her protection, but it bounces back at her.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that is also such a trauma response, as much as I'm being a little silly Billy over here, in the sense of, as a woman, we are taught our beauty is our worth, and in understanding that and reconciling with it, and then also catering to the male gaze and being like, this is my only worth. I think it's very relatable for Alaska. Like, I would have a boyfriend and want all my guy friends to fuck me, but also not fuck me.
Alaska seeks...
Because it makes you feel
that's
like...
Alaska Young, right there.
Seriously.
Like, exactly. No, she seeks validation so much and wants to be sexualized, but, like, on her own terms. But that's because that's what she's been told.
It's the only way you know how to be close to people.
Exactly. Yeah. Alaska is such a deep, deep character, and I cannot wait to dissect into her.
And one of the perks of her is she has cigarettes.
Yeah.
She gives these boys some cigarettes.
Sells them for $5, and the Colonel immediately is like, hey, Miles, you're gonna buy us some cigarettes and you're gonna start smoking. Miles, again, he doesn't make decisions. He's gonna start smoking. So they go to the lake, which is like the only wonder of the world on this high school campus, that is marked by a swan that is an asshole. Like, that is what we learn. And the Colonel just kind of, like, leaves him. He's like, here's the lake. Gotta go find Sarah. Bye. So Miles decides to sit on a swing and smoke. And that's when Alaska shows up and says, hey, I'm gonna get you laid.
Yep, she admits to Miles that she does find him a little bit cute, but she can't do anything
because she has a boyfriend.
Her favorite talking point hits it immediately. She's got a boyfriend. And she hasn't cheated on this one yet, so good for her.
Yeah, making strides.
And then she lasts a whole page.
Exactly.
So Miles immediately is infatuated with Alaska, despite having spent a cumulative of 15 minutes with her over these past 2 scenes. He immediately starts asking the Colonel, like, non-stop questions about Alaska, and the Colonel's like, dude, stop.
He's like, don't go there. I know that she probably made you feel special for a millisecond, but it's not going to transpire into anything.
Yeah, he's like, this is what Alaska does, essentially. And in the middle of the night, Miles is woken up.
She's the man style.
She's the man style. The Colonel's like, hey, have fun, buddy. So he's in on it. And Miles is taken in his little underwear to the lake. He's duct taped, like, limb to limb, so he cannot move. And he is thrown into the lake like a little tadpole.
Yep, we assume it's the Weekend Warriors, and they're also telling him not to hang out with the Colonel.
Yeah. So this went to 0 to 100 real quick. I forgot about this scene in this book until it came up.
Yeah, we realized that, some of all this talk about, like, honor, not snitching, the rivalry between the Weekend Warriors, you're like, oh, cute, there's little gangs, and then they almost kill Miles. Like, first day in, and it's this, like, aggressive, just, like, emasculating moment. There's nothing more emasculating for a character that already very clearly doesn't see himself as a grown-up, as a man, to literally be duct tape, hogtied, and thrown in the river by older men, right? Like, so I think that just, like, opens this up for him to say, oh God, like, this is so serious.
Yeah.
It's also the adventure he wants, though.
Yeah.
He gets a kick out of it.
Yeah,
like
adrenaline. Do you guys, Miles is able to mermaid his way out of it. Do you all think you'd be able to swim out?
No, I'm dead. I'm dead.
Because if you're duct taped, also, like, floating on your back kind of requires your legs, too.
Yeah, it requires your arms.
Core,
yeah.
And breathing exercises.
He is the calmest near murder victim. And they even call that out there. Like, you stayed pretty chill. He's like, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, Miles.
Yeah, Miles, our two-dimensional rock star.
And after this happens, he immediately goes to the one woman in his life for emotional support, Alaska. And we learn Alaska's moody. Is it borderline personality disorder? Meggie projects.
Is it trauma? Is it
we'll never
deep-seated depression?
But she is like, Miles, this happens to everyone. Get over it. You're being such a baby. And then he's, like, dripping wet from the lake and goes to his dorm and sleeps, and he's upset.
Yeah, and then the Colonel wakes up the next morning and he's like, they taped you? Because we learned he wasn't supposed to get taped. He was just supposed to get, like, love dunked, and then it was going to be fine.
Love dunked.
So the Colonel decides to declare war on the Weekend Warriors, and we also learned the Weekend Warriors did piss in the Colonel's shoes.
This is true. We also get introduced to who is going to be another pillar of this friend group, Takumi, who is a friend of theirs who Miles is complaining about Alaska being standoffish, being kind of distant, and Takumi is like, she's kind of a bitch, dude. I don't know what to say.
I also want to, also point out is that he's just like, people are moody sometimes. You have to understand other people. And Takumi's the very first character of many in this book that remind Miles, other people are real people.
Yeah.
That you have to have empathy, dude, and he does not learn that lesson.
No,
not at all.
It's so funny. Like it is literal nail on the head of how many times Miles is reminded to hey, this is a person you're talking about. Just they don't exist in your head as they do in the real world. And Miles is just
yeah.
And people are moody, dude. You got to get used to living with people. You could have worse friends than Alaska, and it's just And Takumi throughout this is just you're such a dick, dude.
Yeah.
Just
Miles
relate.
is a dick.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a huge learning curve for him when he finds out about periods and what happens with
PMS.
Ay caramba.
But then school does start. And we are introduced to Dr. Hyde, who is a religion teacher. Everybody hates Dr. Hyde, except for Miles. He thinks he's the bee's knees. This guy is cool and he's smart, and that's all Miles cares about.
Mm-hmm. He's this older philosophy teacher and kind of religion. He talks about Buddhism and monkism, just being a monk, just being a guy, just being a silly guy learning about God.
Yeah, that was my favorite lecture of his, about how the monks are all just silly guys.
It's all silly guys learning about God. And he drops a lot of good rhetoric in this. Chip goes on a date with his rich girlfriend,
Sarah,
but he can't iron a shirt.
Yeah.
So
this is when we're introduced to class as such a big narrative in this, and Miles becoming class conscious for the first time. He's oh, I've never known somebody who's poor, and then seeing the Colonel torturing himself by dating somebody with so much money.
Yeah.
It's just, he's so self-destructive.
Yeah, the Colonel is full ride scholarship, so these things are stressful to him, and especially he also only has a single flamingo tie, and Sarah, his girlfriend, is a bit not nice.
Her family's taking him to the opera.
Yeah, and she's how dare you wear a flamingo tie? And they have a big fight, and we learn that that's just kind of their relationship, is that they fight. And of course, in true high school fashion, the Colonel's gonna act like this is all relationships are like this. You just fight all the time, but you're in love, and that's what's important. And it's just oh no, how naive and innocent to think that that is completely normal.
No, the Colonel does have a very normal response to the opera. He cannot get his shirt ironed, him and Sarah fight, and he drinks a lot.
Yeah, his milk vodka.
It's unhinged. The idea that one, I think this is true. I think John Green did have a friend who was probably knocking back milk and vodkas. And just it's just a through line that I did gag several times, thinking about that. I think when I read this book first, I hadn't started drinking yet.
Yeah.
And then I'm just milk and vodka. That seems plausible. And I'm oh my god.
I can't.
He said something the Greek gods used to drink this.
I don't think that's
ambrosia, food of the gods.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds heinous that they just permanently have a thing of milk in their fridge that has vodka in it.
But also, who are these 45-year-old men sitting on the couch drinking vodkas and smoking cigarettes in high school, right? These are kids who are really coping with stuff and really substance abuse. I mean, if not to be a nerd, but kids drinking and stuff, it's pretty intense considering what they go through in this book and how much they start leaning on those habits later in the book.
I know. I feel that's the conversation I'll have with so many people about our high school days, where it's did the problems come first, or did the problems always be there, and then you see in media that drinking and smoking you're not supposed to do it, and that's what makes it cool. So then you start doing it, and then it just starts becoming commonplace, and you're oh fuck.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, when Miles first sees the Colonel smoking, he was I'm never gonna smoke, and he sees the Colonel smoke, he goes, I have to admit, he did look cool. It made him look taller, more of a man, more impressive, and then that's what convinced him. He's I want to look taller,
and also
I want to look cool.
It becomes a way for Miles to fit in too. I feel at a deep core, Miles will never acknowledge how badly he wants validation to be liked, and that's why he starts buying cigarettes, starts smoking cigarettes, starts drinking, is going with all of this shit, is because he wants friends finally.
Which, may I say, same. That's why I started smoking and drinking too. So it's in high school, like reading like the past me of just like 40 straight pages of him being just so nervous and not know who he is, and then he sees a hot girl and a short guy looking slightly cool smoking cigarettes, and he's like, that's my new personality, and I'm like, that was me. I totally identify with that.
It's relatable. It's super relatable to just kind of do things to fit in.
And while Colonel is drinking his little milk vodka sitch right now, we figure out why Sarah is mad at him, and she's mad because she thinks that he's the one that ratted out Paul and Myra, the girl who was going to be Alaska's roommate, because the Eagle, the guy who's kind of the dean of this school, caught Paul and Myra having sex, but he would have had to be tipped off.
Yeah.
So no one knows. That's like the big mystery right now, and that's the reason why the Weekend Warriors and the Colonel and his gang of friends are beefing.
Miles kind of walks into a gang war.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day.
Yeah. We kind of fast forward through a few days here. Miles is doing well in school because he likes to read. That's something that is explicitly said. That's not even me just like having an opinion. Like it's explicitly stated. He does one day get kicked out of Hyde's class for looking out the window, and Alaska gets kicked out with him so they can hang out.
In solidarity. My favorite line though is before he gets kicked out, I couldn't see the trees for the forest. Like, John Green is constantly being like, hey, Miles' perception is crap.
Yeah.
He's like, and like, that is one of the more subtle metaphors in this book. There aren't a lot of super subtle ones, but it's like, I couldn't see the trees of the forest, everything so intricately woven together that it made no sense to think of one tree as independent from that hill.
Yeah.
Whereas Miles' main problem is not seeing individuals as different. And he just like does these things, so... Shout out to you, Green. Page 39, you did a good metaphor.
Oh, yeah. And after this moment, when they get kicked out of class, because Miles has been looking at the trees, Takumi and the Colonel, they catch up to Alaska and Miles, and Alaska kind of shoos them out for not standing up for Miles in that moment, and they go to this place called the Smoking Hole, which I don't really get what the visual was of this.
It's by an old barn.
It's under a bridge. John Green. So on his Instagram, John Green recently posted a photo of like the real life smoking hole.
That's so cool.
And one of the current. So there's a real life academy that he went to give a little bit of context. But he like a fan sent him a photo of the actual smoking hole, the bridge. And one of like the more recent students in like black spray paint painted "I go to seek the great perhaps" in his old smoking hole. That's about, so like there's through lines to this book where it's like I think it's still an impactful story.
It's very personal to him. No, thank you for
sweet.
Gosh, Austin, our resident fact checker. Thank God you're here because
our resident John Green stan.
Enthusiast, historian.
And while Austin just made a smoking hole beautiful and a sacred place, the characters in this book are not, because Takumi is rapping.
Yeah.
Doing some freestyle.
Cringe.
It gave me the ick so bad. Like, I feel I didn't write anything in my notes about how Takumi raps because I simply didn't want it to be true.
You guys, there's a lot of rapping in this book, and we're just that's just all you have to know. You can read it and figure it out for yourself. We're not going to encourage that behavior of us to say what it is, though. So there's rapping going on at the smoking hole, and Alaska once again drops the fact that she likes sex. She's a sexual being. What does it mean?
Classic Alaska.
Is she just a young woman and her beauty's her worth at age 16? Probably.
And like talking about vices is like they talk about some other unimportant character who smokes weed. And the Colonel says he loves weed like Alaska loves sex. This is a man who once constructed a bong using a barrel of an air rifle, a right pair, an 8x10 glossy photograph of Anna Koronova. It's just like, okay, that the description of the throwaway character doesn't matter. It's like that description of like, okay, vice as sex and like this like crazy, kind of decently complex world of like, they all smoke, they all drink, and they're all obsessed with sex, but the only one actually getting laid is Alaska. So she's this like big like token of sexuality in this whole friend group. They're all kind of obsessed with her and this like horny teenage boy idea of sexuality, but it's explicitly stated like it's a vice. Like this isn't healthy. Which is 100%. Interesting.
After this, they end up going to, this is a couple days later, they go to a basketball game. Like, we find out that this is a big basketball school, even though nobody is good at basketball, which I think is hilarious, where it's just like, everyone goes to basketball games, but their team is horrible. Kevin, who is like the lead weekend warrior, tries to call a truce, with the Colonel, and the Colonel doubles down and makes it into a game, and he's like, hey, if Miles knows the last words of the next president that you say, then we won't call a truce, but if he doesn't, like, we will. And so Kevin asks for Millard Fillmore's last words. Miles knows them, so the war continues.
Yeah, Colonel's really being a pain in the ass at this game because he also gets kicked out for yelling at the other team going up for free throws.
So funny. I love
chaos,
it. This
absolute
is like
chaos.
Yeah.
But yeah, like with him like doing that Millard Fillmore quote, literally the Colonel's like, that was your first badass moment. Like, this is his validation. Like, all of a sudden these last words that were probably this like embarrassing, quirky thing have now become like his thing.
His
ammo,
yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like you can start to see Miles like puff out his chest a little bit of like, I'm part of a crew, and he's like, you can see it's like, wow, that's a really satisfying moment. It's like, it's this little thing, but you know, it's like this masculinity, great perhaps, is starting to grow for him.
Yeah, he's finally starting to fit in, and he starts really fitting in even more because the next day after a pre-calc exam, Miles meets Laura, who is starting to kind of be a little bit like of a love interest.
She's from Poland.
She is. She's got a slight accent in this.
Guys, she's from Romania.
She's from Romania!
It's a literal bit in the book that Miles is such an asshole he can't remember where
I know, and I was trying to do the correct thing because like when she's introduced they say she's Russian, and then later he says she's Polish, and then it turned out she's
Hungarian and like Moldovan.
Yeah, because Miles is a dick. But they go to McDonald's and they like pack 6 people in Alaska's car, and Laura gets to sit on his lap. So this is pretty intense for high school Miles.
It is. They study a bit, they hang out, and we get introduced to Laura, who's gonna later on be a bigger character, but not right now. We're not gonna have our romantic fixations on her because later that night, Alaska and Miles are watching a movie in the TV room. And they're kind of bonding. He is like, where did you get your name? She says, I picked it off a Globe. I wanted Alaska because it sounded cool.
Yeah, her parents let her pick her name.
And she also says she wants to teach after college, but she kind of shies away from moments of being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. It seems like, she doesn't really trust herself. She doesn't have the confidence for it.
She certainly doesn't trust Miles. He sucks.
It's the first time we get like a human depiction of Alaska.
Yeah.
Because she does want these things, and she isn't just completely steeped in suffering, which is such a relatable thing as a kid. You don't want to admit you want things because that makes you a person or an adult, you know?
Absolutely. And the first time she opens up, she's talking about, the future's a nostalgia. She's actually trying to get deep with him. She's trying to create the actual real life bonds of Miles that he thinks he wants.
Yeah.
He doesn't listen. He cuts across her, and then he just goes, sometimes I don't get you. And then she goes, she didn't even glance at me. She just smiled towards the television and said, you never get me. That's the whole point. John Green is not being subtle here. It's like, it's just like, you idiot. Like, hey, you want to look at her tits and you want to sexualize her and you think you're in love with her. She just tried opening up with you, idiot. Like, listen. And
she tried to like let you into her actual world and you just like vehemently denied it.
Yeah, you literally rejected her, and then he's like, Alaska's so moody.
Yeah, like what a bitch, right?
God.
A little bit after this, the Eagle does end up busting them for smoking in the woods, and they get called to jury, which is like essentially a council where
I love it so much.
It's so fun. But it should be noted that Alaska's really nervous for this jury. While Takumi, the Colonel, Miles, they're kind of like, we're gonna be let off pretty easy. So it'll make sense later why Alaska was so nervous, but everyone gets off pretty easy. Which is good.
Alaska and Colonel, all they have to do is do 10 hours of dishes in the cafeteria, since they said they were the ones that were smoking. And kind of indicate to Takumi and Miles that later on, if they have to take the blame for something else, then that's what they're going to do because they're friends.
Exactly.
And the intense prison rules of Culver Creek Academy. Like, no snitching, and somebody has to take the fall.
Exactly.
And it heightens this intensity, but I swear I went to a big public high school where, like, if you were punished, you just went to detention. And I would have loved to have a jury of my peers. Incredible.
Right?
Like,
oh my gosh.
That would have been so funny. You probably would have gotten away with a lot more.
I was going to say, like, the the jury system in a public school would be like, we're going against the school. Like,
yeah.
It would last 6 minutes,
it's
right?
so funny. But now Alaska's gonna hold true to her quest to get Miles laid, and she's going to set him up with Laura from pre-calc. So they go on a triple date to a basketball game.
Yep.
And Miles doesn't even sit by Laura because Alaska's like, no, you sit by me.
She's playing the long game, okay? She's playing the long game. He meets Jake, Alaska's boyfriend.
And he's jealous.
He's jealous because he's got like sandy blonde hair. He's in a band. He goes to Vanderbilt. He's a hot guy. He's in college.
So I'm going to be the first one to say it. This book does not call out the fact he's like a 21-year-old college kid dating a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And it's just right, like, and I've been reading that in, right? Of just like, okay, Jake, he's probably off doing other things, and he seems to like treat Alaska well, and she likes it. So like, cool, consent is clearly there. But he is just such a nightmare for Miles, who struggles with masculinity and feeling younger and not being able to impress Alaska. And this like supermodel walks in and then like, right, us like reading it, but it's like, hey Miles, what you can't even see, right? Like, he's probably a loser dating a 16-year-old, right? This perception of Miles' eyes is like, oh God, he's a grown man. I'm like, he's a 21-year-old who plays bass in a band who's dating a 16-year-old. Where do we hear that?
Yeah.
You know, like,
it only gets worse for Miles too, because at this basketball game, Colonel pisses off the other team by, you guessed it, yelling, and someone just pelts Miles with a basketball so hard that he gets a concussion.
Yeah.
So not only does he hate Jake, Alaska's boyfriend, he now has a concussion and pukes on Laura's jeans when she comes to help him.
Yeah, and also the Colonel gets dumped. So this is a whole hectic event.
It's a bad
a lot happens. The moral of the story is don't go to basketball games because only bad things happen.
It's kind of interesting because Sarah breaks up with the Colonel because she thinks that he cheated on her with Alaska, which it didn't seem like it was true. But I also sometimes got at times that the Colonel did like Alaska.
Yeah. Or it's possible that they like hooked up when they were drunk once. Like it's like you kind of get that vibe. Like the Colonel kind of gets Alaska. It's interesting.
He's sad about the breakup, but honestly, I think this is a bullet dodge for Sarah. Personally, he seems very angry and
very
he drinks a lot. And though he is a protagonist that we are familiar with, so we gotta love, that's kind of terrifying for a teenage girl. So stay away, girlfriend.
Toxic relationship for sure.
Like, 100%.
Like, oh my God.
Over the next few days, Alaska's being pretty distant.
And it's milk and vodka time.
And Miles is like, why is Alaska being so weird and not talking to me?
The last time you saw her, did you listen to her, Miles?
No.
Did you validate her feelings?
Yeah.
Did you do anything that she would want to hang out with? No.
Absolutely not. And we get another layer that Alaska is a flawed person, individual, not this person on Miles' pedestal, because Takumi tells Miles that Alaska is actually the one that ratted on Paul and Myra, and also maybe told where the smoking hole was when the Eagle busted them.
Yeah.
Violates all the rules of honor, all those prison rules, like basically just betraying all of her friends. And so, but I think it's so interesting that Takumi's not mad.
No.
And he's like this like Nell through the storm, right? Of just being like, hey, Alaska's more complex than you think. And Miles just being like, don't know what you're talking about, man.
Yeah. Like, nope, I got her. Nail on the head. After this, it's Thanksgiving, and Alaska just convinces Miles to forgo his Thanksgiving plans to spend time with her.
Mm-hmm.
And Miles is in, but then immediately starts feeling like homesick, which is, Miles, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Why are you gonna convince yourself to stay for a girl who doesn't like you like that? But I mean, that's what he does, and he gets homesick, and the Colonel is like, you know what, if you guys want to come and stay and have Thanksgiving dinner with my family, like my mom, you can do that.
There's a really important scene before the Colonel invites them over to Thanksgiving, is where they dig up a bottle of strawberry wine in the field, because that's where Alaska holds her wine. And Alaska like puts her hand on his thigh, and like Miles is like, I really want to tell her that I love her. And it's like, buddy, you have spent like probably like 6 hours total like with this person. Like, What do you love her for?
Because she's showing any interest at all, and he needs to be validated. And I think Alaska, right? She has this long distance boyfriend that she's so obsessed with.
Yeah.
But they on this trip they go hunting for other people's porn. They do a little bit of light breaking and entering, all in the name of fun. But then they're watching porn together. They are discussing these sexual things. She does touch him and do all these things, and it's one where I do think Alaska, right, needs the sexual validation.
Yeah.
And she knows that Miles is probably harmless enough to get away with it.
Yeah.
And it's just such a train wreck.
It's
just and it's one where, we constantly want to tell him, hey, man, she's just goofing around.
Yeah.
And then, but, for him, it's just you can almost feel the wave of hormones through the page.
Right?
You're oh my God.
And on the soccer field, while they're getting drunk, she does bring up a pretty central focus of this, which is Simon Bolivar, which was someone who I think Gabriel Marquez, he wrote 100 Years of Solitude. I think he wrote about him, but I think Simon Bolivar is a real person.
Yeah, Simon Bolivar was the military leader that liberated most of South America from the Spanish Empire.
Yeah.
And so the name Bolivia is from Bolivar, and so he's a massive figure in world history, and he's one of these enigmatic figures that we don't understand that well. So when people write about him, he's kind of one of these. He's like a Napoleon or a Alexander the Great kind of person, especially for Latino people.
And she talks about him and the question he poses, which is the question asked throughout this whole book, which is, how do I get out of this great labyrinth of suffering? And they talk about that for a bit, which is a lot of teenage existentialism, a lot of suffering. But there's no time for suffering when there's turkey on the menu.
Yeah, because Colonel, again, as we said, invites them over to Thanksgiving. They end up sleeping over. It's a whole shebang. They have a good time. And then it's a really cute scene. We see more of Colonel's home life and all that. His mom's really cool. And then Alaska takes them to this bodega that she goes to go get booze, and she has a fake ID. It's a whole thing.
Alaska does tell the Colonel, she has previously told Miles, but she does admit to him that she was the one that ratted on Paul and Myra, and he is really upset about that because he takes loyalty and honor and code just to the extremes.
Yeah, and Alaska gets really upset. And Miles is I think she's trying to lean on Miles, and Miles is obviously, just being rubber that everything's bouncing off of, and she just tells Miles that he only likes the fun side of her. She basically calls him out for being hey, you don't like me. You don't. You like your idea of me.
Yeah, making it explicit, and just so many things about this book are, I think, good novel writing. The thing that makes it a YA novel is just John Green laying these seeds, I think, in a novel for adults would just lay them there, and we would connect these. And just so many times John Green will write something subtle and then have a full page describing what he means.
Yeah, digesting it.
Yeah, this book is its own Spark Notes, which is very cool, but I remember that being so much harder for me to understand when I was younger reading it. I'm like, wow, this is so deep and impactful. And now I realize John Green could probably write adult novels, but this kind of explaining and working kind of younger people through these tougher subjects, I find very masterful, because it's not condescending. He's not listen up, reader. Yeah, he's using it in Miles' voice and how this character would process this. But I don't know. Just on the literature side of it, I find it interesting. Okay, YA has to describe some of these things because some of the dots might not go connected by a younger reader.
100%. And then it's Christmas vacation, and then they come back.
It is, and around Christmas time, Alaska is planning this pre-prank with the Colonel, but won't tell Miles what it is, which really pisses him off. But the prank will be called Bar Night. The Colonel is going to have the Eagle call his mom about Takumi and Miles staying over. I think Laura and Alaska have plans to pretend they're also off campus. Yeah, and so they have to pack for 2 days in the woods. They all get there, and the plan, as they say when they get to the bar, is to go into the system and alter some people's grades. Yes. So they're going to hack the data system. They're going to send some rich kids' parents notice that they're failing classes. And it seems to go off without a hitch.
Yeah, it ends up being like pretty fun. Like they all get drunk after, like they're able to distract the eagle by sending off firecrackers.
Hell yeah.
The swan ends up biting Miles's booty.
Yeah, this is the action scene. Like, hey, we've talked a lot about existentialism and emotions, and so we get an action scene. So we're running across and then they constantly talk about like, my heart is beating. It's like as if I've never smoked before, right? Yeah. This is like one of the big crescendos, and I think this is the main climax of the whole book, 100%. Like written like a little bit more than halfway before the end, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And
they also do a little bit of Big Fat Liar. They put industrial blue dye into the Weekend Warriors shampoo and hair.
Exactly. Yeah, so this is like full on 2000s movie. They're having a great time. And then they, obviously, as I said, they get drunk, and this turns into Breakfast Club because they just sit in a circle and talk about their best and worst days and their feelings.
They're rapping. There's some rapping.
There's more
We are going to talk about the rapping.
They do best day, worst day, and we learn a few things. We learn that the Colonel's dad cheated on his mom. We learn Alaska's big trauma is that her mom suffered an aneurysm, and she didn't call 911 because she was a kid, and it kind of sounds like her dad blames her for her mom's death, which is a lot to carry. And it's really not the setting, but it is the setting for Laura and Miles because they do make out.
And he immediately asks her to be his girlfriend, which is the most high school shit I have ever read.
Oh, making out is the same as a proposal when I was like 17. I'm like, we did it. We made it. Good job.
Yeah. They go and leave the next morning. Everything has gone off without a hitch. Miles ends up sleeping all day. Yep. And then we enter, this is the final day before the after. So.
Yeah, I was going to mention that is like in my very old copy of this book, you can literally see this like black line. And so like like we said in the beginning, this book is divided into before and after. But before and after on the paperback is actually marked out by a black page.
Yeah.
So I found myself, right, this is a reread, I know what happens, you guys will get there in a second, but as you get closer to that black line, you've been counting down, right, for 150 pages, and so as I got closer and closer, is like, it builds this sense of dread. Yeah. And the first time you read it, it's a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
Ooh, what are we counting down to? We've just had this amazing...
Yeah, after what?
We had this amazing scene, but right, when you read it for a second time and beyond, it's this big sense of dread and irony that kind of creeps up on you, which I think as far as like formats of books and things, like, one, it's very innovative, but two, like there is this physical black line, and it got in my head a little. We can talk about what that after means in a little bit.
For sure.
No, and I also like that this like last day scene is like the longest scene in this entire section, because it ends up almost obviously being a wrap up of what's happening in the before.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that transpire for all of the characters. I mean, there's like on the smaller side, Kevin, one of the Weekend Warriors, he's got blue hair a la Big Fat Liar.
Calls a truce, so like that's chill.
They call it a truce. Miles and Laura are hanging out watching TV. They're watching the Brady Bunch, which I guess sets the mood because they try a first blowjob. We try a little first blowy. It goes horribly wrong.
as many people's first blowjobs horribly go.
Laura just kind of sits with it in her mouth. No movement, just sit.
Just sit.
So they have to go ask Alaska, what do we do?
And they go to their totem of sexuality. Yeah. Hey, Alaska Young, you're the most sexy person. You're knowledgeable. Hey, 16-year-old who has sex with a adult. Like, tell us how this goes. And
she does.
And she does.
And then they go and do that.
Yeah, and we have like the most sensual moment in the book. Sometimes this book is like critiqued, especially by certain governments in Florida, right, for being porn and being this thing. And, you know, John Green has fought that since this book came out. And one of those concepts is, so there's a scene with an actual blowjob and is the least sexy, most anxiety-provoking thing, and then Alaska kind of demonstrates a blowjob on like a tube of toothpaste, and Miles basically gets off there, right? It's trying to talk about like, hey, he's not present, he doesn't want this blowjob, this real-life blowjob is like...
He's just a horny boy!
He's a horny boy, but I think it's also like... dude, you probably shouldn't have consented to that
No.
blowjob if you didn't want it. If you just
No.
wanted to think about somebody else and you're not ready, right? So, like, talking about, like, you know, coming of age and sexuality at, like, a younger age, I think this book kind of argues, like, hey, if you're not ready, don't go get an awkward blowjob.
But
like,
it is the things you
know,
want to do, because it's the same as smoking and drinking. It's like an achievement as a kid that you're like, God, I don't have forever. I gotta do it now.
It's a coming of age for the great perhaps.
It's one of those, it's like, well, everybody else has done this, so I have to do this too.
And
more importantly, Alaska's already done it. He has to, you know.
It is really Miles' day, though, for the sexy stuff, because later that night, Alaska and Colonel are drinking, and Miles is like, hey, I'll go join my friends and drink, and boy, does he has a time.
Yeah, so they, Colonel gets most drunk. I don't think Miles is drinking. I think he was, like, too hungover. But, Alaska starts saying, like, let's play Truth or Dare. Miles immediately picks Dare, and Alaska immediately dares him to hook up with her.
It is the best progression how it's written. She says, hook up with me. There's a space, and then the next line is, so we did. And I screamed.
Yeah.
I loved how much drama there was in just having that, its separate sentence.
Yeah.
And they do.
Yeah,
I mean,
they just, like, make out, like, the entire time.
They're
The Colonel's, like, passed out, and, like...
No, he's watching.
No, I think he was pretty
He's just, like,
drunk
zonked out in the corner.
he's zonked out,
Yeah,
though. Like, he's not, like, asleep,
He
but
knows
he's too
what is
drunk.
happening, though. He's just there the whole time. I mean, he's not commenting on it. Miles is, like...
because he's very drunk.
cupping Alaska's tit, and they kind of all fall asleep. Colonel's like, there's nothing but drama that's going to come from this. And she leaves in the middle of the night, and she comes back, and she's sobbing. She's like, I have to go. I have to go. I have to go. I have to go. But they are very drunk. Alaska and the Colonel specifically, they're both very drunk. But she's insisting she has to go. She has to drive somewhere.
And it's like 3 a.m, so they're just like, yeah, what? Like, go.
And they are all hammered.
Yeah.
Like, very drunk. And, you know, it's one where, can I just, like, read the little
absolutely,
section?
Go
We're going straight to the text, but fuck, she said. Just get rid of the eagle for me, she said. Her sobs, childlike half screams. God, oh God, I'm so sorry. Okay, said the Colonel. Start the car when you hear the second string. We left. We did not say, don't drive, you're drunk. We did not say, we aren't letting you in that car when you're upset. We did not say, we insist on going with you. We did not say, this can wait until tomorrow. Anything, everything can wait. We walked to our bathroom, grabbed the 3 strings of leftover firecrackers from the sink, and ran to the Eagles. We weren't sure that it would work again. This, like, unquestioning, just, like, this wave of regret, right? That foreboding, you know, that kind of feeling, and, you know, the God, oh God, I'm so sorry, right? Ends up being the last thing in a book obsessed with last words. Yeah. You know, we do get Alaska's last words, oh God, I'm so sorry, which, you know, throughout the rest of the book here is going to be a big motif.
Mm-hmm. And so you guessed what probably happens if you have read it. Alaska, you know, that's her last words. Yeah. Is, oh God, I'm sorry. And the next day...
This is after territory.
We're in after territory. The Eagle wakes up Colonel and Miles and is like, I need to get you to the gym urgently, immediately. And the whole school is assembled. And he says that Alaska was in an accident and died. And I mean, they're responding accordingly. Miles is puking. He's like, this must be a prank. The Colonel is just screaming that he's sorry. And it's pretty graphic. Yeah. I mean, like, you know, especially like young death. Like, I knew someone in high school who was someone who killed themselves. And you don't get over, like, the assembly of, like, seeing their face and everyone being there and the drama of it being delivered.
Yeah, like, this book, like, really does become about the initial, we're invincible, we're young, we can do anything, to the reality of mortality, and we're not invincible, and everything can touch us, even though we thought it couldn't.
And we learned the way she died is pretty graphic. It's not a prank. There was a truck that was blocking. It kind of like jackknifed itself on the highway on both lanes. And she just rammed into the cop car that was kind of separating the whole scene from her. And it doesn't seem like she ever swerved. She didn't really brake. She just kind of went for it.
Yeah.
She hit the gas. And the rest of this book is Colonel and Miles trying to figure out, like, no, it couldn't have been intentional. It had to be like an accident.
Yeah.
It wasn't like she killed herself.
And also trying to separate their own guilt. They let her go. They're feeling so guilty.
And also,
And just, Miles even says, I closed my eyes tight. The ineluctable fact of the matter at hand, I had killed her.
Yeah.
And so, like, these young men who no one is ready to have a good friend die, but just watching them really for the next 60, 70 pages just completely spiral. And trying to like cope and make meaning out of their friend's death.
Like it's a really, really beautiful telling about how grief affects people differently, and also like how grief can be handled so poorly to no one's fault. Like it's not like, oh, because these people are bad, that's why they're handling this poorly. It's like, no, this was like, they're young. This is a very shocking and very just heartbreaking and tragic thing. And they don't know how to process it. The entire first book, we learned how bad at coping with normal problems they were. So now when this huge, huge issue has arisen, they're of course going to handle it just to its extremes. Like the Colonel just up and disappears and he walks 40 miles there and back.
84 miles total.
To like go get like a stack of books. Like it is like they really are losing it.
Yeah. Miles sleeps for 14 hours, which is relatable in itself.
And so the day of the funeral rolls around and like he ends up meeting like Alaska's father, and like Alaska's dad is just being like pretty much like, well, these things happen. Like,
well, he's being an adult, right? Like now, and I've been to funerals as an adult, right? And like these adults who are probably just destroyed in their own right, like these are children, and he's had a wife die, he's now had his daughter die, he has no one else, and then he's like holding it together for these kids. But like there is, if I could critique the book, which there's a lot of opportunities. But like the funeral scene, right? Like, was there something left on the cutting room floor in that? And it's or were they just so
really
lost?
Quick. It's a really quick funeral scene, and I think that's also because like when you think about funerals, like they go by so fast because you're still not fully aware of everything that happened.
I haven't read it, but I have the 10th anniversary edition, and John Green he rewrote the funeral a few times.
Oh, okay.
That's really cool.
I didn't know that.
I guess that this, I don't, before it was longer, and then it was shorter, so I'm sure there's like some meaning in it, but it is short, which honestly, in my idea, I think it makes more sense because like in the next paragraph, in the next few pages, we learn as the Colonel and Miles are like looking for answers that Alaska has written straight and fast as a response to how do I get out of this labyrinth of suffering, which is essentially, life is suffering, straight and fast. You think suicide. So it makes sense why John Green doesn't sit with those moments. Especially like the funeral. Like it's like, you know what? Death is it's straight and fast. And that's what the answer is.
Well, and also to like help them kind of start to go down this path of like, we have to investigate this. In the before part, Alaska multiple times would jokingly say like, I'm going to die young. I'm going to die young. I'm trying to not live like a long life. So she would say things like that, like ad nauseum. So to a point, like it has to make them wonder, was this intentional? They also learned that Alaska's final paper for the first semester of the religion class was all about, how do we get out of this labyrinth of endless suffering. So now they're very much, Colonel's like, I've got to make sense of this as a way to figure out the why, so that way we can finally like put this to rest. And Miles is not on board.
So on top of that, Hyde, their philosophy religion teacher, also poses the how do I get out of this labyrinth of suffering as the question that they are going to focus on that semester.
Baller move as a teacher.
Also,
like, it's probably a bit much, but right? But like, you're teaching a world religions and philosophy class, probably the class that like people aren't relating to, and it's like you make this as like, hey, these questions matter, and that's like John Green being like, hey, thinking about this stuff isn't just existential bullshit. You should have an answer. Like, what do you think about this? Which for younger people reading this I always found that captivating.
And as people do when facing kind of their first death, as Laura said, the Colonel and Miles are really looking for a reason and motive to why she did this. They write down a plan so they don't go insane about talking to eyewitnesses, figure out how drunk she was, figure out why she did it or who specifically she called before she crashed her car, So they start just going down the list. The next day, they go to the cops, ACAB, and they talk to the cop whose car she ran into, Ally, and the cop is like, you know, she never stopped. She just barreled into me.
Like literally straight and fast, like they read in her book. So the cop says it was weird though. He said like there's no swerve. He also says that Jake's white tulips that were in her room were in her car. And so now the Colonel and Miles really are like, this might be
They look up
a
reasons
suicide.
why someone would kill themselves.
Yeah.
They're gonna WikiHow up, like, why did someone kill themselves?
And also in this moment, Colonel does accuse Miles once again of making up a version of Alaska in his head. And, like, the Colonel in his own grief, like, still has to deal with his friend who didn't even know this girl. Like, and he's rightfully pissed.
Because Miles doesn't want Colonel to call Jake just yet.
Yeah.
And Colonel's like, just fucking deal with it.
She wasn't your girlfriend. We have to call her boyfriend. We have to understand. And so, like, this is another one of those John Green moments looking directly into the camera for younger readers, right? Like, let me make this explicit. So you just stop worrying about your goddamn self for 1 minute and think about your dead friend. Sorry, long day. But it's like, Miles is being like, she's like, Takumi says it. Laura says it later. The Colonel says it is just like, you are so obsessed. You're so horny for someone that, like, even when she's dead, you're not letting her die.
Yeah.
Like, just think of her, the real person, not your own feelings, what could be. Like, it is sad, and it's like, but it is like truly like Miles is such a villain. In this back half of the book especially, he's just unable to cope, which is understandable, but not get over his own little mind of like sex.
And it says it also in this book, because like we know her last words were the like, oh God, I'm so sorry. But Miles is focusing on what he wants to be her last words, were her telling him to be continued.
But those weren't her last words.
Those were her last words, and it just goes to give in. He has such an idealization and a construction of Alaska, and he's still trying to write her narrative, even though like her narrative, it was written out for him. Like,
and it's over.
Yeah, it's over. It is done.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know. I think he is like truly like, you know, I think it's become more popular in the last like 10, 15 years since this was written, but like this is a book from the perspective of such a villain.
Yeah.
And like not in an ununderstandable way, but
in a believable way. Because like that's the thing. It's like I feel like there's parts of Miles that like I could even relate to when I was in high school. And I feel like everybody like deals with that when you finally have to realize that other people are also people.
And kids are shitheads.
Kids are shitheads.
And I was don't know about you guys, but like I identified with Miles so much, but now reading it back, I think John Green is angry at a younger self, and I was angry at Miles too. And it's and like as a young man, I was like, yeah, this Miles guy, he's got it figured out. And now I'm like, I'm so glad I reread this, but also like I've got something to talk about in therapy next week. Like, hey,
for sure. You know? Yeah. And in the next step in them trying to rewrite Alaska's narrative, they are going to figure out how drunk she is, so they cook up a plan to steal the breathalyzer from the Eagle's house, because they just, I guess, have 24/7 access to his house. It's like a 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
They get the breathalyzer.
Yeah, I love their Ocean's 11. Yeah. Like, there is like a little side bit of them sneaking in. It's, you know, have to throw in an action scene. There's a lot of,
I think it was honestly a great point to put this because of like all of the like heavy and feelings things, to put just something a little bit goofy in there.
Yeah, there's real pacing to this book.
It's a very well paced book and very captivating.
His editor was clearly like, all right, can we turn off the melodrama for like a few pages? Yeah.
And the Colonel gets drunk to the point that Alaska was. They get the little breathalyzer.
0.24.
Nuts.
Insane. The Eagle comes around and Miles tries to cover it up by smoking, and so he's got jury duty tomorrow. But they do come to the conclusion that she could have still seen the road at 0.24 alcohol. I don't know. Who's to say? I don't know if I've ever been that drunk. But
triple drunk. That is not just one, not just two, but three, right? Like that's. But they do bring up like, what if she just fell asleep? And they reject the idea, even though it's relatively plausible, because it's not good enough. Yeah. It's not interesting enough for them. Like, they are looking for this great, perhaps. Alaska Young. The great Alaska Young couldn't have some very clearly ironic death of just falling asleep at the wheel. She had to either commit suicide or be doing some kind of stunt. And it's like, one thing I read into that is like, boy, she may have fallen asleep.
Yeah.
You don't know. And just that. And then like, And like there's tons of literature like right in the English language about like the irony of death, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's I don't know.
Yeah. And then after this, at jury, Colonel, once he comes out of it, tells Takumi everything about like him and Miles
and what they've been up to, investigating wise,
minus the kiss. And then they are calling Jake the next day to kind of figure out if he was the one that called Alaska. And big whoop, Takumi also reveals that he liked Alaska because everyone likes Alaska in this book.
Yeah, but we learned from Jake that, you know, he was the person that called that night. It was their anniversary, and he had to call her exactly at 3:02 a.m. because that's their anniversary. And he says, out of nowhere, Alaska just freaked out. Like, he literally plays over the conversation. Alaska was just saying she was doodling, and then she kind of lost it and hung up. So they're kind of left with more questions than answers after that. Mm-hmm. Miles, walking down memory lane, goes to the same, like, bodega he went to with Alaska on Thanksgiving, gets some cigarettes from there.
Yeah.
And then Miles also, in some sort of redemption arc, tries to go apologize to Laura, gets kneed in the balls by her roommate, which is hilarious.
Thank God!
Miles is the villain, and like whenever we interact with characters that don't like truly love Miles, they hate him.
Yeah.
Which is just like an interesting view. And also Laura doesn't let him off the hook.
No.
He like explains, gives some half-hearted apologies for like ghosting her and being really rude and sexist to her.
Yeah.
And then he explains himself and she goes, "No, I don't believe that." And he goes, "Well, I'm trying here." Which I'm like, for apologies, right? Like that I'm sorry motif, those last words of Alaska, he is apologizing. But I just love that, you know, they're not letting him off the hook for his own behavior.
She's like, you didn't have to be my boyfriend. We could have just been friends. And it seems like that's what they land on, is being friends. But also, she gave a blowjob. She can't go back.
Right.
At that young age, come on.
But the gang's back in action. So Laura, Miles, Takumi, and the Colonel go to the smoking hole to kind of debrief on their evidence and their findings. And then they're not really concluding anything from this. And Miles calls his parents afterwards. And then that's what he remembers, that like Alaska was doodling. He sees one of the flowers that she often doodled.
Yep.
And he tries to use that to kind of come up with an answer, but it doesn't really lead anywhere.
No, he's like, maybe she forgot something. So she kind of went to the car. But it felt like a very insignificant find. And in the meantime, the Colonel is like, you know, I think in her honor, we should do a senior prank. And they iron out plans. And I kind of love the senior prank motif, because it's like, it to me seems like life is going on. They're moving on.
Yeah. So the prank ends up being for speaker day. They are going to hire a stripper instead of an actual speaker. Miles gets his dad to play along with it, which is like
cool dad syndrome.
Cool dad alert.
I was gonna say cool dad syndrome.
And so they get this stripper named Max, and they pay him ahead of time because the guy's like, hey, just because like I'm not going to do full nudity for a bunch of high school students, and they were like, please, because that's
a grown man is 20 who's not going to have sex, Jake.
Yeah,
like,
seriously.
Don't stop sexualizing kids. Sorry.
No,
beef
you're
against
totally
Jake
right.
in this book.
But yeah, and the prank goes on. Max with 2 X's, the stripper, he starts dancing. The Eagle shuts it down pretty quickly, but people are raving about it. And the Eagle comes to Miles's and Colonel's room, and he just lets them off the hook. He was like, that was good.
Yeah.
And he knows that it was voiced through Alaska, because the speech that they had the stripper give as a professor of sex was just kind of riddled with the patriarchy. Sucks, essentially.
Yeah, the last line we get from the Eagle in this book is like after he lets them off the hook, and he's just been such like the authoritarian figure. They're constantly working around him, and the last line we get from him is he smiled and closed the door.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just one of these things where they see him as such a villain.
But he's not.
No, like the Eagle, this like terrifying figure for them. Like as children, I'm like...
Yeah, he's just doing his job.
He's doing his job, but he's like doing it well.
And he also cares.
Yeah.
Like, he like, at no point has he ever shown that he doesn't care. Like, he's like literally just being like, hey kids, you can't smoke cigarettes. Like, that's bad. Like...
Yeah. And during this time, Takumi has a bit of a breakthrough. He's like, January 10th is the day that Alaska died, but the 9th is the day that her mom brought her to the zoo. So they pieced together that she was bringing flowers to her grave, and she died going through the barricade.
Yeah.
It felt so bad.
And it's kind of beautiful here, because like now they have the closest thing they'll get to a why. but they'll still never get the full answer as to actually what happened. And this is when they kind of decide to stop pursuing it. They just know that she was going to give flowers to her mom. That's why she was upset. They don't know her intention. They don't know if she fell asleep. They won't ever know that.
They kind of have a final goodbye. The Colonel's like, I want to drive through the motions of Alaska's last day.
Yeah.
And they drive at 3 a.m. in Takumi's SUV, just Colonel and Miles. And they're like, sometimes it just felt natural that she was dead. And then they speed up and they go through the moment of where she died, and they slow down and they cry and they hug, and it's very beautiful.
It's such a vulnerable moment between these two kind of this
yeah.
macho bros, like the the Colonel's the center of masculinity in the book, and Miles looks up to him like as a man.
And this is the first time they cry about Alaska's death.
Yeah, and they hold each other and cry.
Yeah,
and it's I thought that was a very beautiful moment.
No, and it's like, again, it says a lot about people's coping, especially like young males who are so afraid to show their emotion and be vulnerable. Like a lot of their reactions were anger going through this,
or we're going to figure it out. You two are going to figure out the mystery of death.
Like there's no mystery here. And so it's really nice that is the like solution there, is they actually decide to like sit in the feeling together.
And Dr. Hyde, in his philosophy for their final, is given the "How would you personally survive Alaska's labyrinth of suffering?" Miles has a really beautiful line about, after all this time, it still seems straight and fast is the only way out, but I'll choose the labyrinth. It blows, but I'll choose it, which I thought was very beautiful. Mm-hmm. We kind of get a goodbye to Takumi, which is he left a note about how he was really mad at them for kind of cutting him out of plans, Colonel and Miles.
Because like he was going through death too, and they just kind of iced him out, which sucks.
Yeah, and he mentions that like, hey, you two chuckleheads were in love with her, but so was I. Like, you guys got so caught up in your kind of macho feelings, and Miles, of course, being so caught up in himself that Takumi and Laura, right? These are these two people that are forced out from their like joint grief, and it was mainly because they were being selfish, and and so they get called out, like, and their friend doesn't say goodbye to them, right? So it's one of these like kind of big moments. No, it's
just a note. That's really sad. It's like losing a friend in another way, because he's like, I felt so isolated in my grief.
Yeah, and he was like, I'm moving back to Japan. Yeah, see you never.
Bye,
and it's just like and. Hopefully, right, like, they don't ruminate on this too much, but it's like, hopefully that was impactful for them. Like, yet another signal from these other people, like, guys grow up.
Yeah, and he also says that he saw Alaska that night, too, like, right before she got in her car, and he's like, and I had to deal with that, too. Like,
he's like, I didn't stop her either. This thing that you guys thought was your dirty little secret that you're so evil for, like, you weren't alone in that. No. There were other people who knew her that could have helped. And
like, again, the world doesn't revolve around you. Like, life exists outside of what you two are currently doing.
But also lighten up, boys. Like it's one where it's like, you didn't kill her. We are in this together, and grief is 100%. Such a community thing.
I feel like in death it's like, I mean, even the dad not crying, and like, going to like my own aunt's funeral 2 months ago and not seeing the people who are at the front of a line at the wake, like they have to really keep it together. And it's like, for who? Who do you have to keep it together for? You don't have to suffer individually.
I was at a big family funeral, like, literally last week. And so it was one reading this, and that same, like, community grief, and it was obviously very different scenario here, but it's just, like, seeing communities grieve, and, like, that's why I was so surprised about the funeral scene. Like, funerals are our societal center of grief, and that's how we process it as a community. He did gloss over it, but of course, you mentioned, like, he went back and forth on that.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty intentional for what he picked. And we get Takumi's goodbye. We get the end where Miles finally answers the how do I get out of the labyrinth of suffering. And I want to read it, unless you guys
let's go
have
for
any
it.
last thoughts.
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit long, but it is like so beautiful, and I will definitely cry reading it. But it is Miles' response to how to get out of the labyrinth of suffering, and his final. Before I got here, I thought for a long time that the way out of the labyrinth was to pretend that it did not exist, to build a small, self-sufficient world in a back corner of the endless maze, and to pretend that I was not lost but home. But that only led to a lonely life accompanied only by the last words of the already dead. So I came here looking for a great perhaps, for real friends and a more than minor life, and then I screwed up, and the Colonel screwed up, and Takumi screwed up, and she slipped through our fingers. And there's no sugarcoating it, she deserved better friends. When she fucked up all those years ago, just a little girl terrified into paralysis, she collapsed into the enigma of herself, And I could have done that, but I saw where it led for her. So I still believe in the great perhaps, and I can believe in it in spite of having lost her. Because I will forget her, yes. That which came together will fall apart imperceptibly slowly, and I will forget, but she will forgive my forgetting, just as I forgive her for forgetting me and the Colonel and everyone but herself and her mom and those last moments she spent as a person. I know now that she forgives me for being dumb and scared and doing the dumb and scared thing. I know she forgives me just as her mother forgives her, and here's how I know. I thought at first that she was just dead, just darkness, just a body being eaten by bugs. I thought about her a lot like that, as something's meal. What was her, green eyes, half a smirk, the soft curve of her legs would soon be nothing, just the bones I never saw. I thought about the slow process of becoming bone, and then fossil, and then coal that will, in millions of years, be mined by humans of the future, and how they would heat their homes with her, and then she would be smoke billowing out of a smokestack coating the atmosphere. I still think that sometimes. Think that maybe the afterlife is just something that we made up to ease the pain of loss, to make our time in the labyrinth bearable. Maybe she was just matter and matter gets recycled. But ultimately, I do not believe that she was only matter. The rest of her must be recycled too. I believe now that we are greater than the sum of our parts. If you take Alaska's genetic code and you add her life experiences and the relationships she had with people, and then you take the size and shape of her body, you do not get her. There is something else entirely. There is a part of her greater than the sum of her knowable parts, and that part has to go somewhere because it cannot be destroyed. Although no one will ever accuse me of being much of a science student, one thing I learned from science classes is that energy is never created and never destroyed. And if Alaska took her own life, that is the hope I wish I could have given her. Forgetting her mother, failing her mother and her friends and herself, those are awful things. But she did not need to fold into herself and self-destruct. Those awful things are survivable because we are as indestructible as we believe ourselves to be. When adults say teenagers think they are invincible with that sly, stupid smile on their face, they don't know how right they are. We need never be hopeless because we can never be irreparably broken. We think that we are invincible because we are. We cannot be born and we cannot die. Like all energy, we can only change shapes and sizes and manifestations. They forget that when they get old. They get scared of losing and failing, but that part of us is greater than the sum of our parts cannot begin and cannot end, and so cannot fail. So I know she forgives me, just as I forgive her. Thomas Edison's last words were, "It's very beautiful over there." I don't know where there is, but I believe it's somewhere, and I hope it's beautiful. And I think that that is, like, such a beautiful, I mean, like, I sobbed when I read it. I'm sobbing now because it's so beautiful to imagine that life continues going on. And, like, as a teen, I mean, I was, like, really reflecting on it this past week. Like, when my dad's dad died, as a teen, you know so much, and you say the most casually cruel things. And I remember telling him that I was like, I don't think Grandpa went anywhere. I think he's in the dirt. And I think, like, reading this as a kid and thinking you are indestructible, and then reading it as an adult and facing so much grief and so much loss, it's like you want hope. You want, like Thomas Edison said, that there's something more beautiful on the end of it. And, like, I mean, this was just, like, really one of the best books I've read on grief.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. No, it's, like, it offers such a perspective that, like, even reading this in high school, that final pages, like, you still can't wrap your head around it until you get older. Like, that's just it.
Yeah, the first time I read this, I hadn't, like, grandparents here and there, but I hadn't had a younger friend die yet. And then, in the years kind of, like, after high school, I had several friends.
Yeah.
Just from different ways pass away. I've been to too many funerals, and then so, like, reading it now as an adult and how I've processed that grief and how it's changed me, right? Like, it, I think people like to joke about John Green and, some of the tropes and who he is online, right?
Yeah.
But sitting down and reading this, like, it is an award-winning piece of literature. And
for
it's,
a reason.
And still, like, it is one of, books about grief are not the most fun rides. And, like, somehow he encaptured kind of, an adventure, coming-of-age story, and one of probably the last 10 years probably better books on grief. I think it's very impressive still to this day.
I agree.
And I finished the book earlier today, just cried again. And it's it's lightning in a bottle here. I think this book is pretty impressive.
Because death makes you have to grow up. And, like, Miles grows so much as a protagonist, and it's not, like, a thing that you should have to grow about, but it is really sobering. And the idea of, like, someone who passes, like, just them passing does not take away from everything that they contribute to the world and can continue to contribute in just keeping their memory alive is such a beautiful message. Like, really sitting after this and having so much family pass in quarantine, this was like the best book I could have read, and being like, God, what good does it do to just keep looking for answers or keep thinking about it?
Yeah.
Because it tarnishes their memory in a way, because it's like, they wouldn't want me to sit in that grief, you know? They would want me to live in like, memory of them, not in spite of, you know, the big moment. Which is so great. I mean, like, fuck. This book is probably my favorite that we've read.
Yeah. Well, it's just so different to a lot of the YA books that exist and that we've read. Like, I don't think I know off the top of my head another YA book that handles and is directly a subject of grief and processing your emotions, and also just, again, the reality of the mortality of it all.
Yeah. And then on top, it's like, hey, it's not just about grief. It's
not.
It's I think a well-executed coming-of-age novel, but also struggles with masculinity and self and discovering, and also empathy. There's a lot of, like, major themes in this book by making Miles such a shithead. But at the end, right, those were Miles' words. So like, this book can also be seen, right, as kind of a long redemption arc for Miles, and him having to confront these negative things. And, like, you know, at the end, like, there's still some things that, right, if you want to be really critical, like, did Miles learn all the lessons? Maybe not, but at the end, he's gone a really far way. Right,
that's progress. The thing where it's like, I think it's like, you could debate so long, like, how much did Miles actually, like, learn? And that's the thing, and that's the beauty of it. It's like, you could argue, well, he's a changed person forever. It's like, but you could also argue, like, he's got a long way to go still, but he's got something to keep going towards. Yeah, so,
big formative moments.
For sure. Absolutely. On that note, we're gonna end this episode on a light and positive note. So we're still gonna do our canceled character. We're still gonna do our top 5. Let's start with nominees for our canceled character. Austin as our guest.
Oh shit!
You have to go first.
So I'm canceling Jake, Alaska's boyfriend.
Oh, that's right.
Because hey, you're a 21-year-old who's dating a 16-year-old. And you show up and you're sneaking her out and you know you're breaking the rules, but also you didn't show up to her funeral.
Yeah.
She died. You knew what you were doing was wrong. You wouldn't look her down the eyes and say who you were. You're canceled, Jake. And I know that you're held up as this, like, paragon of masculinity, like so many hot bassists and bands are. Stop dating children. And if you are going to date one, show up to their goddamn funeral, Jake. Sorry, I've been on one about it while I've been reading, and I just, like, unforgivable stuff. Like, as a man in his 20s, don't date children, and also don't be a piece of shit.
Yeah.
I'll concede to Jake.
I'm gonna concede too. Yeah, I was still unsure of who I was gonna say, but you made the best and most cunning argument.
I was gonna say, sorry, I've been, like, fired up about it.
No, and that was beautifully said. Jake is the canceled character.
Every bassist I've fucked has been a terrible person.
And Jake is no different. So let's talk about our top 5. And this is my favorite segment of our little show. Okay. This is going to be our top 5 better senior pranks that they could have pulled, because I think we all agree the stripper was fun, but, like, it could have banged harder.
Yeah.
For sure. Also going to point out, junior prank. They aren't seniors.
Yeah.
They all have to go back to school and,
maybe
like,
they're
hang
saving
out with
it.
Maybe they are. Sorry, go on though.
Does Austin want to start it off?
Yeah, start with number 5.
Yeah, so our top 5 better prank that could have been played is just his dad's prank.
Yeah, number 5.
There's a through line in this about how he wants to kind of one up his dad, right? His paragon of masculinity. We're gonna throw a better prank. And his dad stole the school bell, which is, like, central to, like, school operations.
Yeah.
Buried it in a cemetery and ransomed it back to the leadership of the school.
Honestly, which is a far superior prank.
Mr. Halter, take a bow. That's great.
Go on and take a bow.
Number 4, they kind of started this by dyeing the Weekend Warriors hair blue, but I want to see Act 3 of Big Fat Liar, because it involves everything. It involves a helicopter. It involves the kid who played Steve Urkel as a kid.
Yeah.
That guy.
Jameel White.
It involves...
Don't call me Urkel.
It involves getting some well-reserved revenge on Marty Wolf of Marty Wolf Productions. But it would be...
I love that film
this
so
book
much.
was really missing Marty Wolf as a main character.
Where's Paul Giamatti? No, but it could...
Paul Giamatti's the eagle? Slow down, though.
It could be. Get it on the eagle.
And then number 3, following another movie trope, I would love some She's All That action where they're starting a love affair with the eagle, and then it ends up turning out it was a whole bet. That would be a very John Tucker Must Die, very She's All That, very fun for me.
Oh, absolutely. Number 2, we had, what if we did a little prank at Alaska's funeral? I feel like that's
what the prank would be. We don't know.
I was gonna say, after all the emotions of this podcast, I regret number 2.
No, I love it. Maybe they proceed down the aisle to a Space Jam soundtrack. Is that what it is?
Come on, slam! Welcome to the Space Jam.
Maybe
that
they put t-shirt guns in the open casket. Who knows?
Who knows? And number 1, the best prank of all would be if Alaska wasn't actually dead.
You know, their denial phase of their grief? That's right.
Yeah.
It was real. It was, but yet again, in American literature, Tom Sawyer fakes his own death, right?
Exactly.
Finn, rather, right? So it's just like,
that.
and it's like, ooh, we're gonna go deep cut. She was hiding in the rafters just to see how sad Miles and the Colonel were.
That's so funny.
Some Mark Twain level shenanigans.
To see if she should actually break up with Jake or not.
Yeah,
he didn't even show up to my funeral. He was using
that
me.
is not boyfriend material.
Cancelled.
100% canceled. And that's going to be it for our first episode of Looking for Alaska of the John Green season. Make sure you follow us on social media at Meggie_and_Laura on Instagram, at Y'all Be Reddit on Twitter and TikTok.
Yep. And if you want to follow Austin, do you want to plug your socials at all?
Absolutely. So at Twitter, where I am probably the most unhinged, that's at Austin T. Merrill.
Nice.
And then on Instagram, where you'll get to see Instagram stories of my cats. That's at AT Merrill. So please come on down. 2 R's, 2 L's, y'all.
And join us next week when we'll be doing Abundance of Catherines.
Yes, with another one of our friends. And that's going to be it for this episode. See y'all next week.